All right, good evening. This is a regularly scheduled and posted meeting of the Community Preservation Commission. It is being held by video and being simultaneously transmitted on the Stoughton Media Access Corporation channel. Therefore, the public is aware and can participate. The idea tonight is that, the idea is that, just one moment, we have a lot of background noise. Um, Joe, if you have background noise. Um, I have any background noise. Can people hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Joe, you are hitting.
No, Scott, you know, your computer is getting up. No, Scott, you know, your computer.
Joe, we're having terrible background noise with your presentation. If you could sign off and come back in, that would be helpful. All right, I'm going to continue. The issue tonight that we're going to be discussing, among others, is use of CPC funds, CPA funds, to assist people who are in need of rental assistance, given that the virus has caused unemployment and terrible disruption in terms of cash flow and priorities for a lot of people. We will be discussing it, and there will be people making presentations to the committee, and the committee will engage in discussion during which the public can be involved by watching. When the committee is done, or at some point in the committee's deliberations, we will invite public comment and questions. What the public will do in that case is call the telephone number that is shown on the SMAC screen, television screen, and you will be put into a queue. We will take your questions in the order in which they were received. The problem, I'm hoping, it's going to be very difficult for people to speak only one at a time. Because I can't see everyone, I was hoping that you could make a gesture that you had something to say and we could recognize you, but that's not now possible. So I think what you should do, can you text during the...
Hey, John,
yes.
John, this is
Yes.
Barry Crimmins. One thing that people can do is use the chat feature in the top right corner of the screen.
Yeah.
And they could type in a question there, and I believe that is visible to everybody who's on the call.
Yeah.
If that's not the case, perhaps people who know this Google Meet format better than I do can correct me, but I believe
That's true.
Okay.
Okay. I'm just doing something now to show that. I just typed in, I would like to speak, and I don't know if I don't know where that appears.
You have to click, John, you have to click enter to send it.
Oh, you have to press enter to send.
Yeah.
Dwight was successful.
Or an arrow. There's an arrow that I hit.
Okay, well, then if people have a comment, members of the committee or guests who are in this live conference, use the chat feature to signal that you'd like to talk, because it's very difficult if 2 or 3 people are talking together, the system gets confused and I get confused. So that's what we'll do. Now, the other thing is, the public, when you call, we would hope you keep your comments and questions short and germane. In other words, deal with the issues that we are talking about tonight. This is a posted meeting. The agenda was posted. We cannot go outside of the agenda. the topic for tonight is specifically on subsidized or subsidizing housing for those in need, especially rental housing. With that, I would like to first ask if other members of the committee have a comment before we get into a presentation. Are there any other members of the committee who would like to say something?
Well, John, Barry Crimmins again, just following up with Barry Castler's earlier comment. I'll make a motion that we open the meeting.
Very good
I'll
idea.
second it.
Motion made to open the meeting. Any
Second.
comment? All in favor? All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone- Is anyone opposed? Is anyone opposed? There's no opposition. The meeting is officially open. Thank you, Barry, for that reminder. That now leads us to the subject of the meeting, and I would invite, I guess Mr. O'Regan is going to be making a presentation to the committee. I would invite him to make that presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was asked by the Board of Selectmen to get in touch and contact the Community Preservation Committee to begin exploring ways that we can use the authority of the CPC to make recommendations for housing to help shore up members of the community who are facing extraordinarily difficult times thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I realize there's no application. The purpose of the request to the Community Preservation Committee was to begin the process of working together to develop what needs to be done so that this is a policy matter that the committee agrees should be addressed and could be addressed through the use of community preservation funds, that we can move that process through quickly. There are models for housing assistance using community preservation funds all across the state. I was able to locate several examples. There's a guidebook that the Mass Housing Partnership puts out. I hope you all received a copy of that, even if you haven't had a chance to read it. I have had the ability to discuss possible options with Town Council, and they would be available to assist us with this, although they weren't able to line up someone to go over things tonight. There are two basic areas that the board identified of concern and asked me to investigate and then present. I've done that. That is whether a rental assistance program could be funded through community preservation funds. The answer to that is yes. Whether homeowners could also receive forms of housing assistance through community preservation funds. And the answer to that is yes. The mechanism to do that, first of all, the Massachusetts has a provision in our state constitution known as the Anti-Aid Amendment. For those of you who are history buffs, that goes back to what was called the Know Nothing Party back in the early part of the 1800s, otherwise known as the Whigs. And it really began in an effort aimed at one particular religious group that was becoming immigrants to prevent use of public monies to support their religious schools. Those days have passed, but the Anti-Aid Amendment continues. The Anti-Aid Amendment prohibits town funds from being directly appropriated to assist any individuals. So the town could not appropriate funds for the purpose of assisting any individual or any particular entity. That does not mean that community preservation funds are not available to provide assistance. The mechanism for that to be used, and Mr. Crimmins was at a selectmen's meeting, I think in October, where we started to tee this up, is a housing trust. And a housing trust could be formulated, and the actual method would be the Community Preservation Committee makes a recommendation for an appropriation. Town meeting approves it. The appropriation would be provided to a housing trust under a grant agreement as a grant to the Housing Trust. And the grant agreement would specify what the purposes of the town funds would be used for. In this instance, generally speaking, it could be designated that these funds would be used to provide assistance to meet housing expenditures for rent, for mortgage assistance, and then however we wanted in the final outcome to phrase it. And so in that regard, give some aid. And why does this make sense for the town? It makes sense for the town mostly because so many people in town are hurting. We need to find ways to help them. It also helps the overall community. We need to keep our population stable. We need to get through this. We need to keep our housing situation stable. So there's an overall public good that can come from this. So my suggestion and request would be for your committee to determine, if you would, whether as a policy matter, this is the direction you would like to move in. If it is, then I'd request that you appoint a subcommittee of, a few numbers to begin working this up. I'm anticipating, subject to polling the members of the Board of Selectmen for their availability, that we're already intending to hold a meeting of the board to deal with election and town meeting issues as a result of the pandemic. I would report back to the board the result of this meeting, if there is any, and then take those steps. I'm sure that the board will complete the formal application for the CPC funding, that we would work with town council to prepare the actual formal documents for you to consider. And the reason I suggest a subcommittee would be in order to vet some of the points through the subcommittee. As a formal subcommittee, the open meeting law would still apply. It would be a little less cumbersome than assembling the entire group. The documents that I see, if you indicate this is a policy you would follow, would be the creation of a housing trust, and then the creation of a grant agreement. A housing trust is an organization that's appointed by the Board of Selectmen for the community. The housing trust is the entity that would actually administer the grants. One of the topics I think to discuss would be the composition of the housing trust. There are three underlying concepts I think that we need to pay attention to in this entire process. One is compassion to fellow residents who are facing tough times. Two is integrity of the process so that those who need the help and are entitled to the help get it. And the third is ensuring that the public funds are properly accounted for and administered. We can deal with all of those in the documents we prepared. This is a personal suggestion, would be that we would chisel into the documents a periodic reporting by the Housing Trust, perhaps quarterly. I would ask that the Board of Selectmen require the town auditor to provide a report both to the Board of Selectmen and the CPC in particular, but it'll be open to the public on how these were administered. I would add that a feature of this procedure would be to protect the privacy rights of those individuals who are in need of help, because we need to respect that, while at the same time providing a level of accountability so that the public knows that the purpose of these funds is actually being honored in the administration of the CPC trust. So that's the gist of what I was asked to present and working it up. There were some questions raised about whether all of this was within the scope of the Community Preservation Act. Town Council says yes, and as people know, the devil is in the details. So if we're all in agreement that this is the direction to go, we can work up the details. I did send out a draft housing trust and a draft grant agreement from other communities. One was from the county of Dukes County that has a very broad housing a grant program. As people may know, aspects of Martha's Vineyard are very challenged for affordable housing in a variety of ways. And I forget the name of the town, but I sent a form of a housing trust agreement earlier. And I believe our town council is the outfit who drafted that particular housing trust. So we have the capability. The question is the policy direction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. First of all, I will express my personal view that this is something that we should pursue. And we have, as a committee, been looking for opportunities to support housing in this community where we have a tremendous need. And we tried a couple of times, but circumstances external to our abilities to control got in the way. And I think this is something we should pay attention to and go forward with. I think the first step would be to come up with a draft housing trust, and I know you have sent a model. I think that trust has to deal with the devil, that is to say, the details, and we need to focus on that. I think the idea of a subcommittee is a good idea, and that subcommittee should include CPC and people from the Housing Authority, I believe, and a selectman, although it should be kept relatively small. The issues, the issues that you went through are the issues that I've been very concerned with. And obviously, they are not unique to us. They've been handled by other communities and they work well. And I think it's something we ought to pursue. And I invite comments from other members of the CPC if you have questions or comments at this point.
Mr. Chair, I would be in agreement with you that this is something that makes sense to foundationally move forward with. I do think there's a lot of details, as the chairman of the Board of Selectmen mentioned, but perhaps we should take a sort of a straw poll of the committee to get a feel for if we all are in agreement with that. I'm only one member of the board.
Well, I agree, and that's why I'm asking for comments from others. We could go through us one at a time if you'd like. Let's start. Let me ask Barry Crimmins, as the Housing Authority representative, what is your view of this?
Thank you, John. And Bob, thank you for joining us tonight. Appreciate the information that you provided to us in your email this afternoon. First of all, certainly I support the idea of the rental assistance program as it's been presented in the materials that we've seen from CHAPR, from Mass Housing Partnership, as well as from the Community Preservation Coalition. One of the questions that I've had about that program is whether or not homeowners are eligible for it. The materials that I've seen would suggest that it is strictly a rental assistance program, but I don't know if there's some hybrid that perhaps could be constructed that would make it applicable to homeowners as well. I think everyone probably in this meeting tonight, certainly the CPC members, are familiar with the webinar that Mass Housing Partnership and CHAPR are putting on Wednesday morning. And it specifically talks about how to establish a local emergency rental assistance program. So maybe some of those questions can be answered at that time. One of the participants in that program is Stuart Saganor from the Community Preservation Coalition, as well as representatives from Chapter and from Mass Housing Partnership. So I'm hopeful that some of those questions can be answered. Frankly, I had not thought of a housing trust as the vehicle to be utilized for the rental assistance program. I see the housing trust as a very important thing and something I certainly support individually and as a member of the Housing Authority. But I see that being utilized differently. If I realize that in some of the materials, it was the housing trust that was the applicant for CPA funds in some of those other communities who for those communities rental assistance programs. So, I don't hold myself out as an expert on rental assistance programs. I don't hold myself out as an expert on housing trusts. And as I said, I'm hopeful that other folks that do have that expertise will be able to share it with us at that program on Wednesday. And as both Mr. Morton and Mr. O'Regan have indicated, the devil is in the details. But I certainly support the concept and principle of a rental assistance program, and I offer my support in putting this together, whether it's as a member of the subcommittee or simply as a member of the Housing Authority or as a member of the Community Preservation Committee.
Thank you for your comments. I would say that we do need an entity if we're going to make this work. And the trust seems to be the most reasonable entity because it would have a scope that went beyond rental assistance. And we may have to look beyond rental assistance at some point. The other comment I would make is that I understand that homeowners who have mortgages and real estate taxes can be struggling too. They also lose their jobs and lose their income streams. The difference is that there's an equity component to paying a mortgage. There's no equity component in paying a rent. And that is a difference in kind, and I'm not sure how you would treat that. But I certainly understand that there are people who are homeowners who are in desperate situations as well.
John, could I just quickly respond? I agree with you that homeowners can be equally affected, certainly by the current COVID-19 crisis. Folks who have lost their jobs or have been furloughed and no longer have that source of income certainly are struggling as well. The only point I was, and I, if we find out that homeowners can likewise be assisted through this program, I would be all for that as well. My only point was the materials that I've seen seem to suggest throughout those materials that it's a rental program. The other thought that would suggest that is the case is, as folks on the CPC know, anytime CPA monies are used for housing, those applicants have to meet very strict income guidelines. And so as a practical matter, although certainly not as an across the board rule, but as a practical matter, that may present some difficulty with homeowners meeting those guidelines as opposed to renters. But again, that's another detail that can be worked out. I do think we need to answer or get an answer to the fundamental question as to whether or not such a program can be used for homeowners as well as for renters.
All right, thank you, Barry. Asking for additional comment, Janice, do you have comments or questions about this proposal?
I read through the literature that we were given, and I had others as well, and it was my understanding that homeowners can be included. My understanding after reading all this, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Is that what our role would be is to decide on a sum of funding that we would allot to whatever the entity is that forms the housing trust. Just as an example, maybe we could grant $150,000 to start but that needs to be okayed by town meeting, and then maybe have something in there that they could add increments of maybe 100,000 as is needed. I don't know if that can be done with town meeting, but what, from my understanding, is that we as the CPC are the funding mechanism, one of them. They can get funds elsewhere, and that's it. We're not running this thing. That was my understanding, and also homeowners can make use of this. We have to be careful of the median income of Stoughton, the median income. I believe that it's less than 100% of that median income makes them eligible, but other resources said 80% of the median income. So we need to find that out too. But I don't really see that as being our role here. From what I read, our role is to come up with a pot of money that we would be willing to supply to the housing trust, and then the housing trust takes over from there. And people need an application, and there's a whole list of things that apply to the application as well. But that would be for whoever the housing trust is, and that's where I don't know what a board would be on the housing trust. I don't know.
Well, I thank you for your comments. I would point out that that's exactly what we have to look for in the document, what the standards are and what the trust would do with the money. Without those standards, we could not go forward, it seems. Mark Semanian, do you have a comment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I do. Actually have a couple of questions. I agree with what Janice was saying. It does vary from report to report that I've been reading, but it does seem that the most recent stuff, they're saying it can be up to 100% of the median income. That's something I want to clarify, but Mr. O'Regan had mentioned that this would be funded through the anti-aid clause. How would that happen, if you have an idea, or did they explain it to you, Mr. O'Regan, or is it just sort of, yes, it can happen for now?
I'm not sure I understand the question. The anti-aid amendment prohibits government from making direct grants of aid to individuals. It goes back to when there was a certain religious group that dominated Massachusetts government and politics and schools that were funded. And there was an immigration wave at the time, and those in power didn't want that group benefiting in the same way that they were, so they amended the state constitution. Over time, the effects of that have been changed, but the bottom line against state money or government money being directly paid out to individuals is what the anti-aid amendment is.
Right.
What it requires is that tax money, which this is, may be used to fund socially or government desired policies. And that is why, in the case of these CPC funds for rental and homeowners assistance programs, and there are both, a grant agreement is executed, and the actual administration to benefit individuals is done by the trust. The trust would be a separately organized 501c3 organization that would not be a government entity. And so they would receive the applications, evaluate the applications, and make the grants. That is how it is done in the communities. I did distribute a list of CP, Community Preservation Fund programs that have been approved for housing since 2016. And if you pour through that list, you can see the scope over the prior 3 fiscal years of the breadth of those. The detail in the Dukes County one, I think, indicates homeowners can benefit. Of course, there are income limitations. I think it'd be appropriate to have some sort of means testing here. And let me just give some indication of how, in the work I've done, I've been able to identify how homeowners could benefit. There are mortgage assistance programs we could develop. There are issues of maintenance and repair. So if you have a significant property that the homeowners are unable to maintain, even a historically significant property, a grant could be made with a requirement that there be a maintenance covenant and historical covenant on the property. We could also require affordability restrictions, and by that we would increase our inventory of affordable housing throughout the town, so that part of the grant program could include acquiring affordability restrictions for a homeowner. And so for the ability to receive financial assistance at the present time, that homeowner would enter into a covenant that the property would be subject to the affordable housing criteria. That would improve our affordable housing. But also, if we look at one of the challenges, which is how do we distribute affordable housing among all the neighborhoods of the community, this would be one way to do it, because one would anticipate that applicants for homeowners assistance would come from across the town, and to the extent we use affordability covenants, that would give us an ability to allocate affordable housing and not as concentrated as it tends to be in 40B projects.
And I thank you, Mr. Chair, for that information, but I did go through the information that you had sent out, and I asked that question because everything that I was able to find either responded to a maintenance issue or required a deed restriction. And I just want to make sure that the group, the CPC, goes into this with their eyes wide open. I was not able to find anything where we directly helped homeowners pay their mortgages. There was instances where they spoke of, rent subsidized and things like that, or maintenance being done, but I was unable to find anything where homeowners could have assistance with their mortgages. So I'm just trying to clarify the information.
And I didn't see a mortgage assistance program in any of that material either, although it's been referred to. And I'm hoping maybe on the 21st at that program, we get some guidance on that.
As am I, yeah.
Okay, my observation would be that these kinds of issues have to be established in the trust. At some point, the CPC has to be satisfied that the trust has sufficient standards and accountability and controls to justify the infusion of funds. After that, the trust would have the responsibility to make sure that those standards, accountability, and controls are implemented. And it would no longer be the jurisdiction, or I should even say the liability of the CPC, if at the time of the grant, the documents were clear that the controls, accountability, and standards were adequate. John Linehan, do you have comments?
Yes, thank you, John. I'm just, I would like to frame the question within the purview of this committee and the Community Preservation Committee, and think about really clearly establishing what our goals are, which I feel like we entered into it without really establishing them fully. If this is about preservation and stabilization of Stoughton as a community, then I think we approach it that way. I don't know if there's any way to look at, and obviously this will go into whoever the trust becomes, a question for them. Is there a way to look at who is eligible for support based on how long they've lived in town or anything like that? Or can people from outside of town just come in and take advantage of it? You know, I would like to think of the people who have been paying directly or indirectly into the community preservation fund, that they be the beneficiaries, whether, even if it's just through their rent. But I'm not sure how, I can see this as a component of our community preservation duties, but I don't see it as a be-all. And I know we've been frustrated by some of these other projects that have failed for various reasons, but I see it as one tactic within a strategy of ensuring that this is a stable community for all income levels. And I think that some of the other things we've always wanted to do we shouldn't use up all of our money, community money, on rental assistance. I think it's sort of like putting your finger in the dike that's crumbling around you. So I think we really need to look at this as a component.
Well, at this point, we haven't decided whether, and after we decide in concept about whether we should do it, we then talk about how much. And I'm not sure that any of us would say we should devote all of our housing funds to this kind of a program. Janice was suggesting something, I mean, the number she used was $150,000 or something as a beginning, see how it works. But we are not at the stage of talking about how much. And I do agree with you, John, that we have to be careful as to what kind of incentives we create for people to come into town and take advantage of it, as opposed to genuinely helping people who were here or are here and need assistance because of changes in their circumstance. The next, I guess I'd like to talk to Tad. Tad, do you have comments?
I like the idea of moving forward with this, but I'd like public comment on it too and see what the taxpayers would like also. But
Yeah.
I'm in favor of investigating it and moving forward with it. Yes, thank you.
All right. Who have I not called on? Dwight. Dwight, you have something?
Well, I think Joe wanted to talk, but I mean, I'm generally in favor of this, but how much money and what the criteria are of the housing trust are obviously huge questions that have to be worked out. But in general, I'm in favor of moving ahead, but it seems like we have so many specifics out ahead of us to work out that I'm only saying that to get the ball rolling.
All right. Joe Scardino, you had something? Robin, you seem to be on the screen. Would you like to say something?
You know what, I was typing, but yes, I actually would. I actually have a question on this, on the spirit of this, and I may have missed it a little bit. Is this, when we're talking about means testimony, or are we talking about people directly impacted by the COVID crisis? Because that's a slightly different thing. I mean, if we're means testing and we look at census data and everything else, those may be people who are or are not impacted specifically by COVID. And my question is, who are we looking to help right now? Is this a permanent program being set up? Or is this something in reaction to what's going on to carry people through? Because now our means testing is going to be very different.
Well, my instinct is that once we set up the housing trust, that housing trust would stay in existence as long as the document permitted, and the standards would apply, and those standards would largely be economic standards. This COVID-19 is simply something that has stimulated the discussion, but the trust would outlast this, and it would continue as long as it had funds and willingness to continue. Do you have a comment on that, Bob?
I do. I think that um, uh, there's a silver lining to the very dark cloud of the COVID-19 pandemic, and it is prompting us to do some things that we haven't had attention on, and I think a housing trust is one of them. Let me give an example. Um, in the downtown, we do want to encourage development of residential units in the downtown. One of the challenges for development in the downtown is the requirement of affordable housing units in each of those developments based on the percentage. Um, if we had a housing trust, that would be a vehicle for us to address some of those developers' concerns and allow contributions to a housing trust. And it would allow us to take advantage of some other options with the housing trust. So this, I think, Mr. Chairman, is an opportunity to create something for now, but build on it. I believe that we could initially provide an assistance program, and I think for homeowners as well as renters, where one of the qualifications is impact on the COVID-19, by COVID-19. And then as a separate matter, look at the broader, longer term question of what kind of housing assistance do we want to provide, similar to what is an ongoing housing assistance program in Dukes County. I don't think we have the capacity. It's not intending to be critical of anybody at all, but I don't think we have the capacity at this time to do both. So I think the focus for emergency relief and then build on this once we get our way out of the woods.
That's right.
I also believe that the qualifications for this emergency would be targeted to that. So you wouldn't be looking at a long-term rental issue for somebody who's undergoing a period of unemployment. You wouldn't necessarily be looking for long-term mortgage assistance or housing assistance for somebody who's affected by the pandemic. That wouldn't necessarily disqualify them from further assistance if there was another program developed. But that's how I think we can focus and then build on it, because we will have created the structure for something that I think many of us have wanted to see for a long time.
Could I add to what Bob O'Regan just said?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say there is an emergency rental assistance programs checklist, and this was sent to us, and it lists very specifically how to run this trust. And it's also supposed to be a temporary housing trust for the specific purpose of helping people that are suffering from losing jobs because of the COVID virus. They have to give proof of that. They have to give proof that they've been laid off or let go because of the COVID. They have to get documentation from their boss. They have to show pay stubs showing what their income was before and after they were laid off, and so forth and so on. So it's temporary, and it's just for people who are affected by the economic downturn from this COVID. And then afterwards, if we decide we want to make it more permanent, we can go from there, which I think is what Bob O'Regan said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interject, but while I'm on it, I looked up the median income of Stoughton. I don't know if this is true, but it said that it is $79,421. So if you're looking at up to 100% of the median, that would be it. Or 80% of it would be $63,536. So it's very, it's outlined in this. I don't know if you can see it. It was sent to us from the Massachusetts housing program. So it's what John Morton was talking about. It tells you exactly how to get the documentation that you need, and also to make sure that nobody is fraudulently looking for assistance. I'm sorry, I'll be quiet. I've just read a lot of this, so.
Thank you for your comments. We have two more that haven't spoken. I tried Joe, he didn't respond, but we'll go back to Joe. Let's go.
Yes. Hi, John.
Go ahead, Joe.
A couple of points. First of all, my understanding from reading the materials is we do not have to use a trust. In lieu of a trust, we can use a third-party quasi-public institution to set that up. And there are several communities that have used the so-called turnkey approach. My feeling is if you start going to town meeting, talking about a trust with trustees that are selected by the Board of Selectmen, and it could fix your house, and it could do this, and it could do that, that you're going to lose people in the ramping up intellectually of that program. It's very simple. The state has set up the rental assistance program. There are turnkey operations already up and running, and we should look among those and select one of those vendors or organizations. The chairman of the Board of Selectmen spoke about a housing trust with having to get a 501c3. I set these up. It takes the IRS months and months. The reason why we embarked on this, and from the Board of Selectmen's meeting, my understanding is there's a degree of urgency with respect to this. So if we want to do the good for the community that we started off discussing, the only way I see to quickly do that and have it understood and accepted or rejected on a very simple KISS approach to delivering it to town meeting. If you start talking about a trust and a developer can pay in lieu of affordable units, and it could be used to fix up a house, you're going to lose people.
Well, let me just say that what Joe just said has some merit, but I also think that what Jenna said has merit, and that is that if this were set up initially as simply an emergency response to the COVID-19 issue, we would have a test that would be more palatable to perhaps this committee and to perhaps town meeting as a place to begin. The second, I'm not clear what a turnkey entity would look like. And I do know that that turnkey entity would have the same issues that the trust would have in terms of accountability, standards, and controls. So,
My understanding, Mr. Chairman, is that DHCD has already sanctioned these programs. And that's where I'm looking to go. I'm not going to suggesting we look through the yellow pages for such a vendor organization.
well, what type of organization? Give me an example. What is the turnkey organization?
John, can I respond to that?
Sure.
So the Stoughton Housing Authority runs a rental assistance program as part of what we do. We are already set up for that. And if you notice in the materials, many of these rental assistance programs are administered in conjunction with the local housing authority. The one on Dukes County that was mentioned and several others are done in conjunction with that community's local housing authority.
Barry, can that, what you have set up, can it handle mortgage payments as well?
Well, I guess, Mark, the way I would respond to that is our tenants are just that. They are tenants. We run a rental assistance program. We run a Section 8 program where rent payments are made to landlords. They're not payable to a bank or a mortgage company. I don't know. I mean, if this program was set up in such a way to provide assistance with folks' mortgage payments, and then I have no doubt that in the same way a determination is made to make a rent payment to a landlord could be made to make a mortgage payment to a bank. If, the caveat being, because I still have questions about this, if such a program could be used by homeowners.
Thank you, Barry. That helps.
Are there restrictions, Barry, on who qualifies for rental assistance through the housing authority as opposed to through a housing trust?
I know that there are, when you say restrictions, there are what we refer to as income eligibility guidelines. So in order to qualify for the rental assistance that I'm talking about through the housing authority, you have to meet the income eligibility guidelines. For that reason, that's why I say that the housing authority is already set up to do this, because this is what we do. When I say we, as a member of the housing authority, and let me be clear on one thing, lest anyone have a misconception. It's not the commissioners of the housing authority that deal with this. It's the staff of the housing authority. We are not involved in tenant selection. We are not involved in income eligibility. We have to set those guidelines as a vote, but we're not involved in the application process. That was changed years ago to eliminate the politics of people calling a member of the housing authority to try to get their brother or sister placed into housing. It's all done through the housing authority staff in conjunction with guidelines that are promulgated through DHCD on the state side and through HUD on the federal side.
And Barry, is your staff working remotely?
Yes, they are.
Thank you.
And you can assist people who are not in public housing. Is that correct?
I mean, I see no reason why we couldn't. The very definition of what we do in the housing that we have is, by definition, public housing. That's not to say, I guess with the exception when we're dealing with Section 8 certificates, that it's private landlords.
But my question is broader than that. You take a standard free market rental, and a person applies saying, I can no longer afford the rent because I've been laid off and I have no income. Can you consider that tenant and do it outside of public housing?
John, that's a question I'd have to get back to you on. I'm not sure of the answer to that.
Okay, well, that's really the issue here before us today. It seems.
Well, I don't know if it's before us today. It's one of those details that I think has to be resolved in the program details. I don't know that the CPC has to resolve that today.
No, I'm not suggesting we are going to resolve it today. I'm suggesting that if we are looking for an entity, and it has been suggested that the housing authority might be that entity, by the way, I would agree that that's something we should consider. We need to know if the housing authority has the right to help people who are not in public subsidized housing. If they can't, then
I can
a sufficient entity to
I can certainly get an answer to that. When I discussed this issue over the weekend with our executive director, she indicated to me that we could administer such a program.
Okay, well, that's.
During this discussion, I had no details to provide to her about what such a program would look like, other than that it was a rental assistance program, or potentially a rental assistance program.
Let me ask Laurice if she has comments. We haven't heard from Laurice.
No, yes. I totally agree that it's something to look, forward to look into. I think we have a lot to think about. I think we should look into it as, pertaining to the COVID-19 dilemma. There's so many people without work and without any financial assistance. So And I do agree that we should probably think of that first, and then the other can be looked at a later time. But that's about it. I'd like to, find out on what the Wednesday meeting with Chapa exactly, what else we can learn.
Um, my instinct is that we are moving toward, first of all, a pretty universal acceptance of the concept. And second, at least in my opinion, we would be wary of establishing a trust at this point for the reasons that I think Joe articulated. If we can use the housing authority with its existing standards and its existing protocols to accomplish the same thing, I'm also inclined to favor some kind of temporary subsidy, which was sort of suggested by Janice, that would be linked to this immediate, urgent need, so that it wouldn't be forever and it could be more finitely defined in terms of the amount and its endurance and justification for its existence. So I mean that's my instinct, and I would welcome comments before we begin to get public comments.
John, those were all good points, and I agree with all of them. I think something temporary beginning is a good thing, and if the housing authority can work out the details rather than putting a trust into place, again, I'm in agreement with that.
Other comments from members of the committee?
I wanted to add that in this article that I referred to, they did mention that the housing authority was a municipal department that could set up and run the trust, but I was afraid that Barry C. wouldn't be too happy with me saying that. But since he brought it up, it does say that you would have to pay administration fees to cover the cost of the program implementation. And those are subject to procurement guidance. So it would be whatever we put in, some of that would have to go to whatever entity in the housing authority, their staff was, I don't know what to say, running this program.
Well, what we might do is similar to the Community Preservation Act. You could say a certain percentage of the money that we grant could be used for administrative assistance, but not beyond that percentage. I mean, there are ways to control that.
I don't know what Barry has to say about that. I'm not trying to put him on the spot at all.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So at this point, are we agreeing that we're talking about an emergency setup of temporary nature? And do we dictate or define how long we see that going and then go from there?
I think, to me, if I might respond to John's question, John Linehan's question, I think that's for the selectmen to decide in terms of what they see as the purpose of this program. If I can elaborate real quickly on two other points on that, if we're looking at doing something for the upcoming town meeting, which I understand is tentatively, I don't think a date has been set, but at last week's selectmen's meeting, they talked about sometime in the latter part of June. That gives very little time to do anything for that town meeting. I know everyone's talking about this as an urgent need, and I recognize and appreciate that as well. I just don't know how practical it is to put a program together in that time frame. It might be more realistic to look at something, if town meeting's being delayed until June anyways. I don't know if there are still plans to have a special town meeting in the fall, which would only be a couple of months later, but that might be a more realistic time period. But again, I think those questions, that's why, one of the things I mentioned over the weekend was that there's a couple of different questions. One is, who's going to set up the program? And then who's going to administer the program? When I was discussing the housing authority's role, I was discussing it more in the context of an administrative role, administering taking in the applications, verifying the incomes, and making sure people meet the eligibility criteria. I think it's up to whoever is going to create the program to determine what that eligibility criteria will be, what the time period would be, whether this is a short-term or a long-term program, et cetera. I think all those program questions, have to be answered by those who are setting up the program.
Well, suppose that we were to agree, and you've agreed to nothing, but suppose that we were to target a program that would have a 1-year lifespan, would be administered by the housing authority, would apply the standards that the housing authority currently applies to subsidizing rent, and would be focused on those people who could demonstrate a change in their financial condition due to this virus, the COVID-19 virus, and that the amount would be a finite amount, and using Janet's number, $150,000, so that the whole thing would be finite in nature. It would not require the creation of a new entity, and it would not require the development of new standards, because the housing authority already has standards. The only difference would be one added element to eligibility would be the impact of the COVID-19 on the ability of the applicant to pay rent.
This meeting?
Any comments on that?
I have one, if it's okay, because other people might want to speak.
Go ahead.
I'm reading all this from the same document that I've been referencing, and it says that we need to clarify that it's temporary rental assistance, and that it should include how long we expect it to run. So we need to regularly revisit the local need for the resource. So to me, that means that whoever is implementing the program will periodically ask for more documentation. Time goes by, more documentation, and then when it starts to level off, we end it. That's
Well,
all.
I think that's a good comment, and it's consistent with what I was saying, and that is it would be finite, it would be in response to the COVID-19, it would be 1 year, there would be a finite amount of money, and the standards that would apply would be the same that the housing authority now applies, with the added note that they would have to demonstrate that their financial situation has deteriorated because of the COVID-19 situation. That was where I was going, and with your help getting there, I think. Any other comments from other members before I open to public comment?
Well, my general concern is that the need, as defined this way, is likely to be huge. I mean, given the criteria that we're setting up, and we have a very limited amount of money to put into the pot, how it would then be sorted out between the people who have need and can document it and what we have to give them. Just that general larger picture concerns me. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it, but I am very concerned as to how the number of people who are likely to have needs that they can define based on this crisis, how as opposed to the amount of money that we would have to put into it. I just sense there's going to be a huge gap between the two. But that said, if people can develop a fund and see a way of managing and distributing the limited funds we have to the unlimited need out there, I'm not going to stand in the way, but I'm concerned about the discrepancy between the likely needs and what we have to throw into the pot. That's all.
That's a very good comment, but I will say no matter how much money you put in the pot, you might not be enough. And the question is it worth trying? The other thing is that the standard doesn't have to be that the entity would provide a grant that covers the entire rent. It could simply be a subsidy for the rent. And I guess it would have to be on a first come, first served basis until the funds ran out, because that's unfortunately the way the world works.
Mr. Chair, a couple of comments on what you just said, if I may. The MHP actually, I believe it was either the MHP or CHAPA, said that one way we could get around a first come, first serve would be to do a lottery. We don't want to discriminate against people who may not be able to get a digital form in and would have to send a paper form in. As far as how much money we put into the pot, we could also ask landlords and or the town if they would be able to come up with a percentage or matching funds. And I agree with you that a subsidy is probably the way this would work best rather than paying it in whole. I don't think there's too many towns that have paid somebody's rent or mortgage in full, but they have subsidized it in times of need or emergency. So those were my thoughts. And of course, we're going to have more meetings on this to hash out some of these details, but there's certainly things that I've thought up. Janice has mentioned a lot of great things tonight too. She's reading the same things that I'm reading, so as is Mr. Crimmins. I think at very least from tonight, we should come away with a sense that we either want to do this or we don't, and then work out the details. That's sort of the primary thing we have to figure out. Are we interested in doing this in some way, shape, or form?
All right, let me ask Bob O'Regan, the chairman of the board, if this direction that we seem to be moving is appropriate and acceptable to him.
Mr. Chairman, I'm flattered you would think it's my call. I think this is a healthy discussion. The use of the housing authority as a resource to administer it, I think, is a laudable resource to pay attention to. What I think we need to investigate is whether that's one piece, but as Mr. Crimmins identified, there would be the administering aspect of it, but setting up the criteria, making sure the criteria are complied with, reporting back on all of those aspects of it. That might not be what is contemplated for this mechanism. So I think a thing to do is to look at the structure, and it might just be that, and I did have conversations about this with town council, that housing trust might be the only way to do it. Might not be the only way to do this particular issue for rental, but if we want to expand the potential uses for providing assistance to homeowners, which I believe we do, you might want to have a group to set those criteria up of citizens of the town. So, long way of saying, this is one of the reasons I suggested it's the policy question where, we want to work on this, that we get a working group together to pick through these kinds of details to come up with it. I respect town meetings need to be skeptical, which is what I hear about housing trust. But I also think town meeting respects the ability of those of us who work together to come forward with a program that makes sense and explain it well. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you to do that, to find the best vehicle to do this. Let me throw a a little bit of personal history in there to indicate why I think this is so important. My dad worked in the space program.
Uh,
And so while he was in the space program in the 70s, there was a huge cutback. He was out of work for 2 years. There were 5 children in the house. My grandparents came to live with us. I don't know how they kept that house. I really don't. It's a mystery on how they kept that house. That's an experience that many of our townspeople are going through now. And for the children involved in that, for the parents involved in that, let's work together to find a bridge to get them there. It's good for the stability of the town, and we have the ability to do it. So if the policy question consensus is that this is something we should do, we can bring that back to the selectmen's meeting that's coming up. I know there are members of the board and other members of the community that would like to work with a subcommittee of the Community Preservation Committee so that we can basically get to yes quicker than the ordinary process. And if that means a one-time structure to get this done that we learn from and maybe develop for a longer term thing, that's fine. That's fine. I don't see us at all paying attention to the longer term housing needs we need to at this particular juncture, and the focus needs to be on the emergency.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your comments. Let me ask now if there's any other comments from the board before I open it to public comments. Hearing none, I now invite the public to make comments or ask questions. You do that by calling the number that's on the screen. We will receive your call and we can patch you in the order in which you have called. So we will wait for a while to see if there is any call.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Michael Barrett, I'm not calling in, I'm on the Hangout.
Hello, Michael. It's good. You're calling in, is that correct?
No, I'm actually on the Google Hangout. I've been here listening dutifully.
Oh, I don't see your image on the screen. That's the problem.
I could probably open the camera and you may be
There
able
you
to see
go.
there.
I got you now. What's up?
Now that I have your attention though, can I throw in my comments? As
What are
a
your-
member of the public?
We'd love to hear your comments.
I think as Mr. O'Regan noted on a note that he sent to the board, I had seen an article last week in the paper talking about another town, the town of Newton was doing something similar, and I just thought it was a great idea, and I sent it along. I think what I'm hearing tonight, and I'm certainly no expert on any of this, I just happen to have a little bit of past inside knowledge on the funding available. I know we have some funds. I know that's been a priority for the CPC to get into more of a housing thing. So I thought it was a perfect fit and a great opportunity for the town, albeit with many potential obstacles, almost all of which have been brought up tonight. Obviously, the timing and the urgency is critical. So I want to thank you all for taking the time and trying to address this. And I'm willing to help in whatever way I can. I think the suggestions of going with a small committee to go out and put together a proposal covering some of the key points that have been brought up and then come back to the committee. And hopefully that gives you enough time to get it through town meeting. And because quite honestly, in terms of a COVID-19 temporary one, while later is better than not at all, something in the fall is just not going to address the immediate problem. So I don't know if you've got any other calls that have come in, but again, just thank you to everybody for taking the time and effort. And I really am pushing for you and hoping that you can pull this off because I think it would be great for our community.
Thank you for your comments. I do not see any telephone calls yet, but I would like to say that I would like people using the text box in the upper right part of the screen, the members of this committee, to let me know by text right now within the next few minutes whether you would like to serve on that subcommittee. I agree that we should have a subcommittee, and I think it should be small. I think it should be people who are very interested in this problem. I think, uh, pardon me for reaching out and grabbing someone, but I think Barry Crimmins should be on that committee since he's with the Housing Authority and has the best knowledge of what's going on. I thank you, Joe. I just got your message. Anyone who wishes to be on that subcommittee, please text me now. All right, I got your message, Barry. Thank you. Janice, oh, I see. Okay, Mark, I got your message. Who else? I would like to draft the most recent speaker. Yeah, volunteered.
Mis-
He'd like to
Mr.
help.
Chairman,
Yes.
would it make sense to have a representative from the Board of Selectmen as part of the initial subcommittee or no?
Well, I think that we would present our group and they would add theirs.
Okay,
I
thank
mean,
you.
I do
Yeah.
think we ought to keep our committee to about 2 or 3 members. 3 members, I would say, and I have 3 names now: Mark, you, and Joe, and Barry.
Okay.
If you 3 would like to do that, then Bob is on the line. He knows who you are, and he could put together whatever he thinks is appropriate from the selectman's point of view, and a citizen perhaps. And I have in mind a citizen who just spoke. So I leave it. I leave it. I guess the ball is in the court of the Board of Selectmen, because we are a funding source, and we, I think, have evidenced pretty much unanimous approval of the concept. And we now know that we need to work with the devil himself on the details. I can't emphasize enough that I think that the Housing Authority is the right entity, because if you begin to introduce a trust, you then have to deal with a whole new entity, a whole new 501c3, a whole new set of people and conditions. And this is to be a sort of temporary test case. There is already an entity, it already has standards, it already has an administrative function. And that seems to me to be the quickest way to get somewhere with the least anticipated resistance. But that's just my view. There are no other calls coming in, so
John, can you hear me?
yes, please, go ahead, Barry.
Dwight would like to make a motion. He needs to unmute himself, though. It would be *6. It's probably the easiest way to do it.
Okay, at this point, well, we could entertain a motion that basically it's the spirit of the board. I mean, I guess I would like to ask the question a different way, and that is there anyone on this board who would resist going forward with this subcommittee, and that will be the subject of a motion, with this subcommittee, which is empowered to come back to us, working with the Board of Selectmen and a citizens group that the board might designate, with a recommendation. And that recommendation may be to go forward with a certain amount or to not go forward after its review. But what I would like to hear is that there's pretty much unanimous consent at this board level for the concept, so that it's not a waste of a whole bunch of people's time and good effort to go forward with a recommendation. Any comments on that before I ask for a motion?
Just,
Hearing-
Mr. Chair, just that we should take a roll call vote and we should include a citizen as part of that subcommittee. I think you formally asked, Michael,
I would like,
or maybe he hasn't responded.
Michael, are you still with us?
I am still with you.
Would you like to be on that committee?
I would be happy to be on that committee. My wife may
Then-
kill me, but I'd be happy to do it.
All right. Well, other than this, then, I would ask for a motion, and we will do a roll call vote on the motion to create a committee of the Community Preservation Committee, which would consist of Joe Scardino, Mark Stamanian, and who else was the one?
Barry.
who was-
Yeah,
Barry?
Dwight has moved that very motion.
Second.
Yes. There's a motion made and seconded. Let me ask it this way, because we can't go through the whole list. Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Or
John,
would you change the motion?
Well, I'm sorry, because it's a virtual meeting, you must do a roll call vote.
That's correct.
Okay, okay.
It must be done.
Well, all right, let's go. Barry Crimmins.
Yes, in favor.
Okay, Janice.
Janice?
Janice, are you
You
there?
have to unmute yourself. You have to unmute, *6.
Okay, got it. Yes, I'm for it.
Okay. Mark Semanian.
Yes.
John.
Yes.
Littlehead.
Yes.
Robin.
She's not a voter.
Oh, that's correct. Tad.
No,
Yes.
Okay, and Joe Scardino.
He has to unmute himself also to respond. *6.
You just hit the microphone button.
Yeah, hit the microphone button at the bottom of the screen. Put your,
Yes.
okay, good.
And Maurice, well,
Larice.
Yes. My answer's yes.
okay.
Okay. And
What about Dwight?
and Maurice, who else? Who have I
Dwight.
missed?
Dwight,
Dwight has to,
I think he voted yes by chat, but I'm not sure.
He made the motion, didn't he?
He did.
He still needs to vote on it.
Dwight,
though.
yeah, Dwight, I didn't call Dwight. Dwight, are you with us? Dwight McCarron.
Yes. Yes.
I don't know where. Oh, yes, he says. Okay.
Ron, you can vote.
Yeah. So we have a unanimous vote. I thank you all very much. Is there any other business to come before this meeting?
John, if I can add one comment,
Yes.
it might be very helpful and not to put too much pressure on Mr. Castler, who continues to do such a great job, as I can tell from his minutes. But if he could get together a list of the issues out of tonight's meeting for the subcommittee, that would be extremely helpful to make sure that we cover all of the points.
I'd be happy to do that.
I knew
Yeah.
you'd say that.
Barry takes very good notes.
Yes, he does.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason I asked. He does such a good job. You layer it on him even more.
Barry Kessler is the beneficiary of the notion that no good deed goes unpunished.
I'm happy to do it. It's a worthwhile cause, and I'm glad that we're going in this direction.
Any other comments before we close?
I move that we adjourn.
A motion is made.
Second,
Is there a second?
yes.
All in favor?
Should we have a discussion of what when and what the subcommittee, we know what they need to do, but when are they gonna start doing?
Michael, what I will do, if it pleases the committee, is I'll send out a first email to all of us, and then somebody can decide who wants to run that and take it over. I'll just get basic information to you through Barry. Does that
Yep.
make sense?
That's a very
And
good
it
idea.
does, and it may make sense for the CPC. I don't know if you have another meeting scheduled or to put something on the boards in a relatively short time frame in order to allow or force us to meet the urgency of the situation.
Well, what's going to happen, if I could just butt in for a second?
Yeah.
We're going to attend online on Wednesday morning, a webinar from CHAPA and MHP, and hope to gain a lot more insight into this process. So I think we were planning on meeting anyway, again, before very long. So we don't have an actual date yet. Part of that depends on when the Stoughton cable can cover it. But I'm hoping to put together something maybe later this week or maybe the beginning of next week. That may be too soon for the committee to get back on anything. I know your intent, Michael, was to light a fire under the committee and make sure it doesn't get dropped. I know it won't get dropped. But we decided that we want to come back and meet just with the new information we get from on Wednesday, or whether we want to come back after somebody's had a chance to hash out some things.
Hey, John Morton? John?
Yes.
Could I ask a question or clarification? It's my understanding that the 4 members of the subcommittee that we just elected are intended to be part of a subcommittee that includes the members of the Board of Selectmen. So this committee has not been formed. We have just said that these are the 4 members through the CPC and Michael as our designee that will be included as part of this subcommittee that Selectman O'Regan suggested is to be formed.
That is correct. And for that reason, I think that Mark and all of you on the committee ought to include Bob in the distribution list, and then that list will be expanded to the extent that the selectmen change the composition of the committee. But whatever change they make, the 3 representatives of the CPC remain the same.
Oh, I agree, but I guess I thought somebody was suggesting that the 4 of us should be meeting. I think that's premature until the full committee has been formed.
No, what I would suggest, Barry, was that I send out an email including the 4 of us as just a basis or a foundation, including Mr. O'Regan from the Board of Selectmen. And that could be the subgroup. If you know what we choose to do and how we do it is a different story. I wasn't suggesting that, we start the process yet. Just that we get everybody's information is in one email, and then we can begin the process. And we'll wait to hear from the selectmen on what route they want to take when it comes to either appointing somebody to it from their board.
Thanks for that clarification, Mark. I
Yeah,
stand
and I
corrected.
think that does work.
Thank you,
Mark,
Barry.
because what I wanted to avoid was leaving this meeting with nobody knowing what that next step is.
I got that
Then nothing
feeling,
would happen.
and I understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael.
And I think the next step is you confirm in an email the 4 people to Bob and ask for direction as to when the committee will be formed and who will be on it.
Correct.
Yep.
All right.
Barry Castler, I'm going to include you in that as well, being our program administrator.
Okay. Any other comments or suggestions?
My motion,
Leads to the question of, does it make sense to include Barry Castler to conduct the same functions for the committee that he does for the CPC?
Right, and I can,
minutes, the,
I'm glad to do that. If you'll have me, I'm glad to do
it
it.
certainly would be helpful.
I would like that.
All right, well, let's see how that goes. I think that's a good suggestion. Yes, I think that's a good suggestion, but that's going to be up to the Board of Selectmen to pick, to organize the committee and deal with its meetings and so on. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
There is, it was made
There
by
is.
Mike. Seconded.
I'm not
If we're
sure.
not gonna set are we gonna set a meeting date tonight or no? A next meeting date?
Why don't we wait until after Wednesday? I think I'll need
Okay.
Mike Cable and see what our options are.
Yeah,
Then I'll
right.
second motion to adjourn.
A motion is made to adjourn. Is there a second?
Yes.
All in favor? Anyone opposed to that motion, speak now or forever hold your peace. There being no opposition, the meeting is adjourned.
John, you have to do a roll call.
Okay. Sorry about that. Roll call. Let's go. Jerry, Crimmins,
In favor.
Janice,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John Land,
Yes.
Maurice,
Yes.
Tad,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes.
John Morgan, yes. Who have I missed?
Dwight, yes.
Dwight, yes.
Yes.
All right. Is that it?
That's it.
Good night, everyone. Thank you for your.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Hey, John, how do